In an upscale restaurant where money decided who deserved respect, a millionaire publicly humiliated a single-father waiter in front of the elite crowd. She believed he was just another poor man bowing for tips and scraps to feed his daughter. When her rage escalated beyond words, she attacked him physically to teach him his place. The entire room held its breath, certain it was over for the waiter. But seconds later, silence consumed everything because no one expected who he really was. Jallen Cross woke before dawn in the small apartment he rented on the east side of the city. The walls were thin enough to hear his neighbors arguing through the plaster, but he had stopped noticing years ago. He moved quietly through the dim hallway and into the kitchen, where a stack of unpaid bills sat beneath a coffee mug on the counter. The top envelope was from Children's Hospital, stamped with a bold red reminder that payment was overdue. He did not open it. He already knew what it said. He pulled eggs from the refrigerator and cracked them into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence. His daughter Aria would be up soon, and she always asked for scrambled eggs on Wednesdays. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with her mother's deep brown skin and a smile that could pull him out of any spiral. She had asthma, the kind that required expensive medication refilled every month, the kind that kept Jallen working double shifts at a restaurant where the customers rarely looked him in the eye. Aria shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She climbed onto the chair and rested her chin on the table. Her voice came out soft and hopeful. "Dad, can we go to the park today?" Jallen set the plate in front of her and smiled, though his chest tightened. He glanced at the hospital bill again, then back at his daughter. "This weekend, kiddo. I promise." She nodded and picked up her fork. She never complained. She never asked why they could not afford the things other kids had. That made it worse. Jallen worked at a place called the Azure, an upscale restaurant in the financial district where a single bottle of wine cost more than his monthly rent. The dining room had tall ceilings, marble floors, and chandeliers that caught the light like frozen rain. It was the kind of place where people celebrated promotions and closed deals over $30 steaks. Jallen had been there for 3 years, long enough to know which guests tipped well and which ones treated the staff like furniture. He arrived early for his shift and changed into his uniform in the narrow locker room. The black vest and pressed white shirt made him look professional, though the fabric never quite fit right across his shoulders. Devin Rourke, the restaurant manager, was already barking orders in the kitchen. He was a wiry black man in his 50s with graying hair and a voice that carried over the clatter of pots and pans. He spotted Jallen and waved him over. "Table 12 tonight. Big party. VIP investor. Keep your head down and don't screw it up." Jallen nodded. He had heard that line before. Keep your head down, smile, nod. Apologize even when you did nothing wrong. It was the cost of working in a place like this. Mara Linton, another server, caught his arm as he passed through the service station. She was younger than Jallen, maybe mid-20s, with dark brown skin and natural hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had worked at the Azure for 6 months and still believed that hard work would get you somewhere. "You okay?" she asked quietly, glancing toward Devin. Jallen gave her a small smile. "Always." She did not look convinced, but she let it go. She knew better than to push. The evening shift started slow. Jallen moved through his section with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He refilled water glasses before they were empty, cleared plates the moment forks were set down, and never interrupted conversations unless called. It was a performance, one he had perfected out of necessity. Then Selene Marcour arrived. She walked through the front door like she owned the building, which, for all Jallen knew, she might have. She wore a tailored Chanel blazer over a black dress, and her heels clicked against the marble with sharp, deliberate strikes. A Patek Philippe watch gleamed on her wrist, the kind that cost more than Jallen would make in 5 years. Her deep brown skin was flawless, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her expression was cold, calculated. She carried herself like someone who had clawed her way to the top and expected everyone else to remember it. She was followed by a group of 6 investors, all dressed in expensive suits and speaking in low, confident tones. Devin greeted her personally at the entrance, shaking her hand and guiding her toward table 12. Jallen watched from the corner of the room as Devin gestured in his direction. His stomach sank. Selene settled into her seat at the head of the table and barely glanced at Jallen when he approached. He set down the menus and offered the wine list with both hands, the way he had been trained. "Good evening. My name is Jallen, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" Selene did not look up. She flipped through the wine list with one manicured finger, her lips pressed into a thin line. After a long moment, she tapped the page. "Chateau Margaux, 1995. Jallen nodded and turned toward the wine cellar. He knew the bottle she wanted. It was stored in the temperature-controlled vault behind the bar, wrapped in tissue paper like a relic. He retrieved it carefully, checked the label twice, and brought it back to the table. He presented the bottle to Selene with the label facing her, waiting for her approval. She lifted her eyes just enough to see the label, then set her phone down with a sharp click. She raised the glass to her nose, swirled it once, and set it back down without tasting it. "This isn't what I ordered." Jallen blinked. He kept his voice steady. "Ma'am, this is the Chateau Margaux 1995 you requested." Selene's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Are you trying to teach me about wine?" The table went quiet. The other investors glanced at each other, but said nothing. Jallen felt the heat rising in his chest, but he forced it down. He had been through this before. Some customers needed to prove something. He just had to outlast it. "Not at all, ma'am. I apologize if there's been any confusion. I can bring you another bottle if you'd prefer." Selene leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "What I'd prefer is competent service." Jallen nodded and took the bottle back to the bar. Mara caught his eye from across the room, her expression tight with sympathy. He ignored it and pulled another bottle from the vault, identical to the first. He brought it back to the table and poured a fresh glass. Selene did not even look at it this time. She waved him away like she was swatting a fly. The rest of the evening followed the same pattern. Selene found fault with everything. The appetizer took too long. The steak was overcooked. The water glass was smudged. Each complaint was delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. And each time, Jallen apologized and corrected it. The other guests at the table shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke up. Money had a way of silencing people. Then Selene decided to make it personal. She set her fork down in the middle of her meal and looked directly at Jallen. Her voice carried across the dining room, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You know what your problem is?" Jallen stood perfectly still, his hands folded behind his back. "Ma'am?" Selene gestured to him with one hand, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're too confident for a waiter. It's off-putting." Jallen did not respond. He could feel the eyes of the other diners turning toward them. Mara had stopped mid-pour at another table. Devin was watching from the host stand, his face tight with concern. Selene continued, her smile widening. "Let me guess. Single dad, right? Wife left because you couldn't provide. Now you're stuck here hoping for tips to pay the rent." The words landed like punches. Jalen's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He had learned a long time ago that reacting only made it worse. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Selene laughed, sharp and mocking. "Your job is to serve me, not to stand there like you're somebody." One of the investors, a distinguished black man in his 50s with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Selene, maybe we should—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "No, this is important. People like him need to understand their place." Jallen felt the towel in his hand twist tight. He focused on his breathing, the way he used to before a fight. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He thought about Arya waiting at home, about the hospital bill on the counter, about the promise he had made to take her to the park this weekend. He could not afford to lose this job. Selene stood up from her seat and stepped closer to him. The room seemed to hold its breath. She was shorter than Jallen by several inches, but she carried herself like she was looking down at him. Her voice dropped lower, almost intimate, like she was sharing a secret. You know what I think? I think you're the kind of man who takes whatever life gives him and calls it enough. No ambition, no fight, just a waiter in a cheap vest. Jallen met her eyes for the first time. His voice came out calm, measured. Ma'am, I think we should both take a step back. Selene's smile vanished. She moved even closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Her finger jabbed toward his chest, stopping just short of contact. Don't tell me what to do. The dining room had gone completely silent. Phones appeared at nearby tables, recording in the dim light. Mara gripped the edge of the bar. Devon took a step forward but froze, unsure of what to do. Jalen's feet shifted slightly, his weight settling into his heels. His hands remained loose at his sides. He did not speak. He just waited. Selene's eyes narrowed. She had expected him to flinch, to apologize, to back down. When he did not, something in her expression shifted. It was not anger anymore. It was something colder. She wanted to prove a point, and Jallen had just become the example. She took one step back, and then she swung. Selene's hand came fast, aimed at Jalen's face with the full weight of her anger behind it. But Jallen had seen it coming from the moment her shoulder shifted. His right hand rose in a smooth arc and caught her wrist mid-swing, stopping it cold in the air between them. The slap never landed. For a split second, the entire room seemed to freeze. Selene's eyes went wide with shock, her mouth opening slightly as she realized what had just happened. Jalen's grip was firm, but not painful. He held her wrist just long enough to make his point, then released it and took a step back. His voice came out low and controlled, the kind of tone that carried weight without volume. Ma'am, I'm asking you to stop. Selene yanked her arm back and rubbed her wrist, her face flushing darker. The shock in her expression twisted into something sharper, something that looked like humiliation mixed with rage. She had not expected resistance. She had expected him to take it, the way people like him always did. The fact that he had stopped her felt like an insult worse than anything he could have said. She turned back to her table, where the 6 investors sat in uncomfortable silence. One of them, a black woman in her 40s with sharp features and pearl earrings, looked down at her plate. Another man checked his phone, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. But Selene was not done. She needed to reassert control, to prove that this was still her room, her rules. She laughed, sharp and brittle, and gestured toward Jallen with an open hand. Her voice rose loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. Did you all see that? This is what happens when people forget where they belong. The woman with the pearls shifted in her seat. She spoke quietly, almost reluctantly. Selene, maybe we should just... Selene cut her off with a wave. No, this is important. People like him think they can challenge people like us just because they catch us on a bad day. He needs to understand something. She turned back to Jallen, stepping even closer than before. The space between them shrank to less than a foot. Jallen could see the veins in her neck, the tight set of her jaw, the way her breathing had quickened. She was losing control, and she knew it. But pride kept her moving forward. You think you're special because you didn't flinch? Selene's voice dropped lower, almost intimate. You're not. You're a waiter. A single dad who couldn't keep his wife. A failure pretending to be dignified. Jallen did not respond. His hands stayed loose at his sides, but his feet had shifted without him thinking about it. His weight settled into his heels, his left foot slightly forward. It was a stance he had not taken in 5 years, one that his body remembered even when his mind tried to forget. Mara was standing near the bar now, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles had gone pale. Devon had moved closer to the dining room entrance, his face tight and uncertain. A few guests at nearby tables had their phones out, recording in the dim light. No one intervened. Money had built a wall around Selene that no one dared to cross. Selene reached out and shoved Jallen's shoulder with both hands. It was not hard enough to knock him over, but it was meant to provoke, to force a reaction. Jallen took a single step back to absorb the momentum, his balance never faltering. He did not shove back. He did not raise his voice. He just looked at her, his expression calm but firm. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." Selene's face twisted. "Or what? You'll hit me? Go ahead. Try it. I'll have you arrested before you make it to the door." The investors at the table exchanged glances. Elias Brenner, the man with silver hair, stood up slowly, his voice careful and measured. "Selene, this has gone far enough. Let's just finish dinner and—" She whirled on him, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. "Sit down, Elias." He sat. Selene turned back to Jallen, her breathing ragged now, her composure unraveling with every passing second. She had built her entire life on the idea that power meant control, that money meant respect, that people like Jallen would always bow. But he was still standing, still calm, still looking at her like she was the one out of place. It broke something in her. She stepped back, her hand dropping to her side. For a moment, Jallen thought she might actually stop. But then her leg came up fast, aimed at his midsection in a wild, graceless kick meant to hurt and humiliate. She wanted to drop him in front of everyone, to prove that even a man who refused to flinch could still be brought low. Jallen's right hand swept down in a controlled arc, catching the outside of her shin just above the ankle. He redirected the force with a slight twist of his wrist, and Selene's leg swung harmlessly to the side. Her balance went with it. She stumbled, arms flailing, and barely caught herself on the edge of the table. The room went completely silent. Selene straightened, her chest heaving, her face flushed dark. She stared at Jallen like she could not comprehend what had just happened. She had kicked him. He should have fallen. That was how it was supposed to work. But Jallen was still standing. She came at him again, this time with her fists. There was no technique, no strategy, just raw anger driving her forward. She swung at his face, then his chest, her movements wild and uncoordinated. Jallen sidestepped the first punch, ducked under the second, and caught her wrist on the third. He did not squeeze. He did not twist. He just held her there, his grip firm enough to stop her, but gentle enough not to hurt. "Stop," he said quietly. Selene wrenched her arm free and stumbled back, her breathing ragged. Her hair had come loose from its ponytail, strands hanging across her face. She looked around the room at the investors frozen in their seats, at the other diners watching in stunned silence, at the phones recording every second. She could see it in their eyes. She was not in control anymore. So she did the only thing she could think of. She charged. She came at Jallen with both hands, reaching for his face, nails extended like claws. Jallen shifted his weight, turned his shoulders, and stepped to the side in one smooth motion. Selene's momentum carried her past him, and he placed one hand lightly on her shoulder to guide her forward and away from him. It was not a shove. It was not a strike. It was just redirection. But Selene was off balance, moving too fast, and her feet could not keep up. She tripped over her own heels and went down hard, hitting the marble floor with a dull, echoing thud. The sound seemed to fill the entire room. She lay there for a moment, stunned. Her dress twisted around her legs, her hair across her face. The silence that followed was absolute. Jallen stood where he was, his hands at his sides, his breathing steady and controlled. He had not thrown a punch. He had not raised his voice. He had only moved, redirecting her attacks with the kind of precision that comes from years of training. But to everyone watching, it looked like he had dismantled her without even trying. Selene pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, gasping for breath. She looked up at Jallen, and for the first time, there was something other than arrogance in her eyes. It was confusion, fear, the realization that she had made a terrible mistake. She scrambled to her feet, her face pale now, the flush of anger replaced by the cold shock of humiliation. She pointed a shaking finger at Jallen, her voice cracking. "He attacked me. You all saw it. He attacked me." No one spoke. The woman with the pearls set down her napkin and stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Selene, you attacked him first." Selene spun toward her, eyes wide. "What?" Another investor, a younger black man with glasses, held up his phone. "I recorded the whole thing. You went after him 3 times. He never touched you except to stop you." Selene's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked around the table, searching for support, for someone to back her up. But the investors were looking away now, distancing themselves. Elias stood and placed his napkin on the table. He did not look at Selene when he spoke. "I think it's time we leave." The others nodded and began gathering their things. Selene stood frozen, watching her carefully curated evening collapse around her. She turned back to Jallen, desperation flickering across her face. "You're going to regret this. I'll have you fired. I'll sue this restaurant. Devon finally stepped forward, his voice tight and professional. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Selene stared at him, her mouth hanging open. "Excuse me?" Devon gestured toward the door. "We have security footage of the entire incident. You assaulted one of my employees. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police." Selene looked around the room one last time. The other diners had stopped pretending not to watch. Phones were still recording. Mara stood near the bar with her arms crossed, her expression hard. Even the kitchen staff had gathered near the swinging doors, watching in silence. Selene grabbed her purse from the table and stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking violently against the marble. The investors followed at a distance, murmuring among themselves. Elias glanced back at Jallen as he passed, something like respect flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. The door swung shut behind them, and the silence lingered. Jallen stood in the center of the dining room, surrounded by witnesses and cameras, and realized that his life had just changed in ways he could not yet understand. He reached up and slowly untied his apron, folding it carefully over his arm. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. But inside, something had shifted. Mara was the first to move. She crossed the room and stopped a few feet away, her eyes searching his face. Her voice came out soft, almost tentative. "Jallen, are you okay?" He looked at her and nodded once. "Yeah." Devon approached from the other side, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the folded apron in Jallen's hands, then back at his face. "You didn't do anything wrong." Jallen met his eyes. "I know." Devon ran a hand through his graying hair and let out a long breath. "I don't know what happens next, but whatever it is, the footage will back you up." Jallen nodded again. He looked around the dining room one last time at the chandeliers and the marble floors and the perfectly set tables. He thought about the hospital bill waiting on his kitchen counter, about Arya asleep in her bed, about the promise he had made to take her to the park. He set the apron on the nearest table and turned toward the door. Mara called after him. "Where are you going?" Jallen stopped but did not turn around. His voice was quiet but certain. "Home." He walked out of the Azure and into the cool night air, leaving behind the world of expensive wine and silent witnesses. The city stretched out before him, indifferent and vast. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Somewhere closer, a phone buzzed with notifications. But Jallen did not check it. He just started walking, his mind already on the small apartment where his daughter was waiting, unaware that everything had just changed. Jallen walked 12 blocks before he stopped feeling the adrenaline in his chest. The night air was cool against his skin, and the streets were mostly empty except for the occasional taxi rolling past. He kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes forward, replaying the last hour in his mind. By the time he reached his apartment building, his phone had buzzed 17 times. He pulled it out and saw messages from Mara, 2 from Devon, and several from numbers he did not recognize. He ignored them all and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Aria was asleep on the couch, her small body curled under a blanket, the stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. The television was still on, playing some cartoon with the volume turned low. Jallen stood in the doorway and watched her breathe, the rise and fall of her chest steady and calm. He crossed the room and gently lifted her into his arms. She stirred but did not wake, her head resting against his shoulder as he carried her to her bedroom. He laid her down on the mattress and pulled the blanket up to her chin, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Jallen stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on the edge of the bed. He thought about the hospital bill on the counter, the rent due in 8 days, the promise he had made to take her to the park this weekend. He thought about all the things he had sacrificed to keep her safe, to give her a life that did not involve the violence and chaos he had left behind. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. The first message was from Mara. It was short and direct. "Are you okay? Call me." The second was from Devon. "Police came, reviewed footage. You're clear. Selene filed a complaint, but they're not pursuing it. Call me when you can." The third message was from a number he did not recognize. It was a link to a video. Jallen hesitated, then opened it. The video had been posted 2 hours ago and already had over 50,000 views. The title read, "Millionaire Attacks Waiter, Instant Karma." Jallen watched the video in silence. It started with Selene shoving him, then kicking, then charging at him like she had lost all sense of reason. The camera caught every moment, every failed attack, every stumble, and it caught Jallen standing calm and controlled, never striking back, only redirecting. The comment section was filled with outrage, support, and speculation. Some people called him a hero. Others called Selene a monster. A few asked who he was. Jallen closed the video and set the phone down. He did not feel like a hero. He felt tired. The next morning, he woke to the sound of Aria moving around in the kitchen. She was standing on a chair trying to reach the cereal box on the top shelf. Jallen crossed the room and lifted it down for her, setting it on the counter. She smiled up at him, completely unaware of anything wrong. "Dad, you didn't go to work last night?" Jallen shook his head. "I came home early." She poured cereal into a bowl and climbed back onto the chair. "Does that mean we can go to the park today?" Jallen looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, and felt something tighten in his chest. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, kiddo, we can go to the park." His phone rang. It was Devon. "You see the news?" Devon asked. "Some of it. The restaurant's getting calls. Press wants to interview you. Selene's lawyers are threatening to sue, but her own investors are backing away. One of them gave a statement saying she was out of line." Jallen leaned against the counter. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you're not in trouble. The footage cleared you, but it also means you're going to have attention on you whether you want it or not." Jallen nodded. "I'm not coming back." There was a long silence. Then Devon spoke, his voice softer. "I figured. For what it's worth, you were the best server I ever had, and you didn't deserve any of what she did." Jallen felt something loosen in his chest. "Thanks." By the afternoon, the story had exploded. Selene Marcourt's name was trending on social media. The video had been shared millions of times. News outlets were running segments on workplace abuse and the treatment of service workers. Selene's company released a statement distancing themselves from her actions. 2 of her major investors publicly withdrew from upcoming deals. Jallen did not watch any of it. He took Arya to the park, like he had promised. They spent the afternoon on the swings, chasing each other across the grass, sitting on a bench eating ice cream. Arya laughed in a way that made everything else seem small and far away. That evening, after Arya was asleep, Jallen sat on the couch and finally allowed himself to think about what came next. He had no job. He had bills he could not pay. He had a daughter depending on him. But he also had something he had not felt in a long time. He had his dignity back. His phone rang again. This time it was a number with a local area code. The voice on the other end was deep and familiar. Jallen Cross? Jallen sat up straighter. Yeah, who's this? The man introduced himself as Cade Mercer, the owner of a martial arts gym on the west side of the city. He said he had seen the video. He said he recognized Jallen's movement, the way he had controlled the situation without escalating it. He said he had done some digging and found out who Jallen used to be. You were ranked in the top 10 welterweight division 5 years ago. Then you just disappeared. Jallen did not respond right away. He had spent 5 years trying to forget that part of his life, trying to be someone else. I had a daughter to raise, Jallen said quietly. Cade's voice softened. I respect that, but I'm calling because I need an instructor, someone who knows what they're doing, someone who can teach discipline, not just technique. I think that's you. Jallen stared at the wall. Teaching was different from fighting. It was about building people up, not breaking them down. It was about control and patience, things he had learned the hard way. I'll think about it, Jallen said. Cade gave him the address and told him to stop by whenever he was ready. Jallen sat in the silence of his apartment, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. He thought about the years he had spent bowing his head, swallowing insults, pretending to be small so that people like Selene could feel big. He thought about Arya and the kind of man he wanted her to grow up seeing. He picked up his phone and sent a message to Cade. I'll be there tomorrow. The next morning, Jallen woke before dawn and made breakfast for Arya. She sat at the table eating scrambled eggs, swinging her legs beneath the chair. Dad, are we still going to be okay? Arya asked suddenly, looking up at him with wide, serious eyes. Jallen sat down his coffee and knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. He took her small hand in his and squeezed gently. Yeah, kiddo, we're going to be okay. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made everything worth it. As he walked out into the morning light, Jallen thought about the video still circulating online, about the headlines and the outrage, and the slow, inevitable collapse of Selene's empire. He thought about the lesson she had learned the hard way, the one that money could never buy. Never judge a single father by the apron he wears, because beneath it you might just find someone who has fought harder battles than you'll ever know. And in the end, that quiet strength would always win.